Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil or argue with each other. And peace, peace, peace be unto all. Swami Vivekananda famously said that whatever he teaches is only in the Upanishads, and of that he takes one value, strength. He goes on to say very, very straightforwardly, strength is what the Upanishads speak to me from every page. It's a wonderful statement. If you ask people about spiritual life, very often they'll talk about devotion, they'll talk about love of God, they'll talk about moral attributes. You have to be a good person. You have to obey certain instructions that are issued from Scripture. There are certain doctrines that you have to believe in. And certainly we have to follow truthfulness. We have to make sure that we don't murder anybody or steal from anybody. All these virtues, no doubt, are all very good. But here, one message is there from the Upanishads, strength. This is highlighted by Swami Vivekananda. Indeed, those familiar with what we may call the Holy Trio, that is Vivekananda's master, Sri Ramakrishna, his consort, Holy Mother, we can see that they embody different characteristics and different values that are being emphasized. But strength is the one strand that goes through all of them. And you can see Swami Vivekananda in a heroic stance, something like a Napoleonic stance with arms folded high up. What great courage he had. And here he says, strength. As opposed to what? As opposed to weakness. And every page of the Upanishads he's saying contains this value, strength. Now you may read all the Upanishads and study them, stanza by stanza. You won't necessarily come across this value directly, strength. But if you see the practical application of what is being told, you will see that without this strength, which is also commensurate with faith, without these two things, interchangeable things, then we can't really even proceed. Because even to cultivate a resolve requires an element of strength. So in this next hour or so, let's explore what it means to be strong and how we can practically employ it in our life. First of all, it begins with an assessment. In the face of adversity, how courageous are we? And we should also not confuse strength and courage with aggression. Aggression and justified anger. A lot of people say, oh, justified anger. Well, anger is never justified. But strength is that power that resists anger, that suppresses the impulse of anger. Can you see the difference? Anyway, Swami Vivekananda goes on, this is the one great thing to remember. It has been the one great lesson I have been taught in my life. He's talking from personal experience. Now let's have a look and see what that personal experience is. And in another place he'll also say, this whole life is like a gymnasium. That is, the inference is, the whole of nature is designed to make us strong. If we relate that to the modern evolutionary theory of survival of the fittest and struggle, we can see that all of struggle is there, and the effect of it will be that the strong survive. the weak diminish and go out of natural popularity. They diminish into nothing. They become extinct. And so it is true to say that life is strength. Now, in his own life, he's saying, what is one of the most tragic things that happened in his own life, according to his own account? Well, when his father passed away and left the family in debt, and to see the suffering of his family and how he had to go from door to door in order to get some employment, sometimes barefoot, sometimes with no food. And then his family circumstances, so that by the time, during his wanderings, he had arrived at Dehradun, he was full of compassion for the suffering. But compassion, what will you do about it? That is to exert strength. So in his life, having come across so many vicissitudes, like all of us, to one extent or another, he really would have said, in my life, during that awkward period of his time, he said that the only person who really understood him, who really loved him, was his master Sri Ramakrishna, who never abandoned him, no matter what all kinds of rumors said. He's become an atheist, for example, was circulating. So many things were said against him. In our own life, so many things you can guarantee will be said against us also. So how thick-skinned are we is a good question each and everyone has to answer, because this value of strength comes at different levels. First of all, there's physical strength, and then there is mental strength. Then there is a strength which has the capacity to decipher what is the correct course of action and take control. On this level that we call the level of the buddhi, the intellect, we can allow that to exercise itself as an executive officer. But behind that, there is something. And the source of all our strength comes from there. And the Upanishads will call this Atman, translated as self, not to be confused with all the other layers. This is an unchanging entity. This is infinite. This never wanes or waxes. It is always constant. It is always consistent. It always has the same quality, if we can call it quality. Then Swami Vivekananda goes on to say this. Strength, it says. Strength, it meaning Upanishads. O man, be not weak. Now, in addressing this, of course, he's really talking, and many of his lectures will be aimed at the Indian populace. He has this lecture to my brave boys, for example. Push on with the organization he's talking about. What organization is that? Well, the organization of relief for the impoverished people. There cannot be any growth without freedom, without liberty, he says. Our ancestors freed religious thought, and we have a wonderful religion, he says to his own countrymen. But they put a heavy chain on the feet of society, and our society is, in a word, horrible, horrid, diabolical. In the West, he contrasts, society always had freedom, and look at them. On the other hand, look at their religion. In a few sentences, he's now encapsulated his whole view of East and West. It's a curious, fascinating thing that I have told everybody, or a number of people anyway, and they have also told me as well. Isn't it curious that the fundamental text of Hinduism, namely the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, is exhorting strength. It's exhorting us to go to war. But make no mistake, this is not the battlefield jihad. No, not at all. This is jihad in the same sense as Muslim mystics will have it. the war is not on the battlefield. The war is with your own mind. You can raise it up as you want. You can lower it down as you want. But the lower you go, the weaker you become. The higher you go, the stronger you become. And it's not exalting warfare. It's exalting courage. Stand up. And of course, if you interpret it as a military person's duty is to fight, then let it be a fighting process that a military person does. That is his swadharma. Where do we start now? What is the spiritual life of a soldier is to fight? Just to fight anything? Today, of course, is not like the ancient days. Today, what it means to fight is an element of cowardice because there's no compassion in it. In this fighting that we do in modern warfare, we can involve, unfortunately, and we have seen it now in recent news, we involve civilians, old people, not military people, people who simply want to live their life in harmony and peace, people who want to plow their fields, people who live in villages and cities and towns. And all of a sudden a missile comes and hits them. What a terrible thing. And then there's the other dimension of modern warfare, which is terrorism, where, again, innocent civilians are the targets. It is the weak that are the targets. When we say weak, we mean those who are helpless, in a helpless condition, innocent people, in that sense. This is not strength to go and do this. This is, in fact, an element of weakness decided by maybe two aspects in modern life, the political spectrum and the media spectrum. But behind it, of course, is all pride and is all greed when we look at it properly. Should we blame people for this? Not at all. Not at all. The human nature is like that. But human nature can be adjusted because it's not your intrinsic nature. It is simply a behavioral nature. And we have to assert this and change this behavioral nature by asserting our strength. It takes a strong person, a strong character, a heroic character, to be able to change the course of the normalcy, let's call it that we find. To stand up and go against the grain on a stance of principle, and on a stance not just principle, but also practice. It takes courage to recultivate the habit level. And so he saw weakness on both sides. Swami Vivekananda saw the weakness of his own countrymen, and he had a desperate urge to uplift them, having been trod over. And yet their religion espoused strength. Get up and fight. But on the other side, Christianity espoused turn the other cheek, a policy of nonviolence. And let's be clear, two types of saints are there. One saint is the administrative saint that has to do what they have to do. The other is the renunciant saint, the person who is of the nature naturally of nonviolence, a dedicated person who takes a vow of nonviolence. Great example of this is the story of Vishwamitra. I won't tell the whole story, but he started off as a military person. And he ended up making a combat with a nonviolent person, Vashishta. Until he realized, Vashishta's power comes from concentration, meditation. But you see, behind it was a wish to gain some kind of power. And when he really understood at the end of the day and became Brahmavidya, became the recipient of divine wisdom, then he naturally became a non-violent person. And so in the Ramayana, we find his ashrams being attacked, his sacrifices being attacked. And he has the capacity and he has the power to combat it. But since he's not an administrative sage, he has to take on the assistance of Rama and Lakshmana. Man, be not weak, says Swami Vivekananda. Are there no human weaknesses? He goes on to question. Well, yes, there are human weaknesses, he goes on to say, but you don't cure weakness by compounding it. Now, there are two different modes of psychology here. Let us take, for example, the scenario of the Bhagavad Gita, where the first chapter is Arjun Vishad Yoga, that is the yoga of Arjun's despondency. It starts from a point of weakness. So we start off from a point of relative weakness. We have to assess where we are. And one of the great components of what we call the six treasures, 4 components are necessary for a student in spiritual life. They are viveka, that has to be an element of discernment. The effect of that will be vairagya, a certain renunciation of the fruits of all your activities, so that the mind does not get fully disturbed. There are 6 treasures that have to be cultivated, 6 modes of behavior that have to be cultivated, 6 values. And finally, there has to be a strong desire for freedom or the truth, or in devotional terms, a strong desire for God. What is my goal, says the devotee, to see God, to have a vision of God. What is my goal? The question is asked to a jnani, to get freedom. To find out what is the truth is the goal of the Raja Yogi. Let me find out what is the truth that is there within me. Let me explore that. And the Karma Yogi also has a desire for freedom from all the disturbances from all his activities. Now, in amongst the 6 treasures, we have this wonderful value called titiksha. That means forbearance. That means a tough response. So we are, in a sense, just like the military people that also require discipline and that also are prepared to go through various hardships. And it means nothing to them because their main aim is in life. And Arjun, as a military person, has forgotten this completely. He has fought many, many battles. But because of the particular circumstances he's facing, namely his loving friends and relatives and teachers on the other side, those who he reveres, he decides that possibly a better course of this is not to engage in any self-defense or righteous war, a war that brings justice to the vast majority. And he decides he will no longer be a military person. He'll go and be a non-administrative sage. Then who will fight? Having been given all these skills and all this great, there's nobody in his day who was more skilled at archery. Having been given all these skills and talents and abilities, having given a particular role in life for the welfare of humanity, he turns his back. Now, it doesn't take a lot to see that this motive is more selfish. It's to do with self-centeredness. Let me withdraw. The others can do what they like. But I see it as a sin, let me withdraw. Now, Christianity, that has the opposite view, turn the other cheek, has become now, over history, has become the aggressor. Even Pope Julius was a pope that put on armor to protect the papal states, something that is almost unthinkable today, that a pope who is espousing world peace and talking to world leaders and has this value of peace at the forefront of all his talks and thoughts, as we all do. And he puts on armor and engages in warfare. The Knights Templar in the Crusades, an order, monastic order, who decided that they will live a monastic life on the one hand, and yet they will put the Holy Cross, the Red Cross, indicating that they were fighting for Christ. Look at the wars and bloodshed in the name of God and God and religion. Swami Vivekananda states that more blood has been shed in the name of God and religion than any other cause. He was talking, of course, prior to the 20th century, where these most terrible, terrible world wars took place. And so religions that espouse love, as all religions do, compassion, non-violence where they possibly can, they decide that they'll engage in it. That means they bring the value of this religion down. That is not strength. So we have to make sure we don't confuse strength with unnecessary aggression and lack of compassion. I feel sometimes in Vedanta, when we study these texts, because the Upanishads are in terse stanzas, which allow for elaboration and commentary. In fact, they allow thought, and they also allow not only contemplation, but meditation, till we get to the actuality of the thing. If we don't go through that process in studying scripture, we could be inclined to be hard-hearted, lacking compassion completely, taking ourselves away completely from the human sphere. And yet, as long as we feel embodied, we have to adopt that at least until we understand the oneness of all. And the oneness of all is where strength begins. But at least in principle, we can catch it. So we can understand why Sri Krishna tells us, or tells Arjuna, and therefore all of us, to stand up, not to yield to unmanliness. And in the case, of course, of that suffering person who is so suffering from mental disturbance, in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, in the first chapter, we can see the effects of a lack of concentration. That is a weakness of mind. Concentration is strength. It takes great strength to take all the energy resources of the mind and steer it in one direction only, confidently and with great faith and with great intention, great gathering up of energies and directing it in a highly attuned way. Because most of us have a condition in the mind of scatteredness. All our mental energy is scattered in all different directions, like seeds scattered everywhere. We have to gather them in, and then we can see the glory of a totality. So in the case of Arjun, for example, and therefore all of us, the one that's comforting us and providing us with some resolutions must first help the sufferer to get back their self-confidence. In other words, get back their inner strength. And if we are supposed to handle ourselves without any external help, fortunately nature provides us with a lot of help in the form of scripture, in the form of models of holy people and holy lives. And ultimately, of course, in the resort for a devotee of the Lord of the whole universe, the Lord of our own life. So, what does Krishna do in the Bhagavad Gita? The Lord's kind but firm encouragement, exhortation is suitable for everybody in every context, actually. And of course, he says that famous statement, yield not to impotence. And then he says, you have a potential, O scorcher of enemies. Whence has this faint-heartedness come upon you, a condition unworthy and disgraceful? Shake off this mean weakness and stand up. What a beautiful, beautiful passage. Immediately when we say strength, every cell of the body can resonate with it. We can be strong. You can try it for yourself. You repeat this value, strong. That's why in all the various aphorisms I give, one-word aphorism, strong, true, wise, full, free. The first thing is strength, strong. That's the first requirement that we have. Stand up and be strong. And then what are you doing? Well, Arjuna in this case is resorting to various arguments as to why he should not stand up. In other words, he's presenting a Western psychological formula, and I know where this formula comes from. It comes from Saint Augustine originally in Christianity. And maybe it comes also from there, from Islam, from there, and so on and so forth. Maybe it has its roots even earlier, where whenever a catastrophe happened amongst the chosen people in Judaism, then they would analyze and say, what did we do wrong? We should appease God. In other words, if you start your life off with an Adam and Eve version of things, from the Abrahamic point of view, that has become a theology. Don't forget, this is not a criticism of the Abrahamic religions, only a certain interpretation, a certain slant, that you have to start from a point of weakness. And from St. Augustine onwards, it has become a theology that we're starting off with an original sin, an original point of weakness. Now, it's only a shift of emphasis, because we also, in Vedanta, acknowledge that we start off from ignorance. We are ignorant. When we say we start off, it means we start off in our acknowledgement. But underneath that is all perfection. We are all perfect, full, and free. That is the Vedantic position. Whether you are a dualist, whether you are a qualified dualist, or whether you are a non-dualist, but non-dualism, of course, will emphasize it most. You will say, yes, you may feel you are a creature, you may feel you're an individual suffering, but I tell you, if you have and cultivate a penetrating vision in yourself and others, you will see that there is only that perfection, only that unity of existence. And when you see that, there's a practical manifestation of it, because it is that that manifests as this so-called life, this scenario, this waking state. And when you have a penetrating vision to that, then everything becomes perfect, everything becomes strong, everything becomes abundant. If you want abundance, go to the source of the abundance. If you want strength, go to the source of that, the omnipotence. If you want knowledge, go to that source of omniscience. If you want abundance, go to that source of omnipresence. So that we have, when we learn to trace back to the source, then we have it. Now the Abrahamic scriptures will do that. We all come from one source. It's called Yahweh. That one source. Actually, that word is hardly pronounced in the Jewish tradition. It's all right. But one source is there. One light is there. And everything else comes from it. And theology might say comes from nothing, ex nihilo. But that will be okay to a certain point until we analyze it properly and we say that's not exactly possible. It has to come from the source itself. It has to manifest from itself. And this idea of manifestation becomes what we call Vishishtadvaita, that is qualified non-dualism. Non-dualism says only that Brahman is there. Vishishtadvaita says, yes, that may be so, but it manifests as the world. and we are a spark of the divine. And dualism will say, well, you may say all of that, but I prefer to be a creature and love God as a creator. All of them are steps on the way to understanding. You are grieving, you see, says Krishna, but he's doing it with a loving smile, out of compassion. He's not wagging a parental finger. He's saying, the Lord with a smile, as it were, says, you are grieving for those who should not be grieved for. The wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. I remember having a dialogue with a hospice counselor. I also am a hospice counselor. And I quoted this passage, and they couldn't grasp it. They said, but that's inhuman. Everybody grieves. I said, yes, but nobody is wise. It is only the wise that grieve, neither for the living nor for the dead. Don't misinterpret it as a lack of compassion. We start off from where we are, and compassion is a virtue. And it is through this virtue that we refine the mind and become pure and loving. There's a story that I once heard from a Jewish rabbi. He sets the story at a wedding. And there's an older man there, and a younger man comes up to him and says, I know you. Do you recognize me? And the older man says, no, I don't recognize you at all. He says, are you sure? This is not at all. I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. Why should I recognize you? He says, well, you see, you used to be my school teacher. Oh, okay. And how is it that you remember me above every other school teacher? He says, and then he unfolds a story. And the old man says, what are you doing? He says, I also became a teacher. I'm now a school teacher. Oh, very nice. Why did you decide to take that course? He said, because I was inspired by you. And the older man looked at him in a puzzled way. And the younger man said, I need to explain, since you don't seem to remember. And I'm surprised you don't remember this. You see, in the classroom, there was a young boy, and his uncle gave him a watch, a beautiful watch. And he was so proud of this watch. And he kept it in a pocket and brought it to school. And I looked at that watch and I thought, that would be absolutely fantastic if I owned this watch. So I can't do anything. I can't afford such a watch or anything like that. But you know what? I know where he keeps it. And temptation overcame me, he says, and I stole the watch. And of course, the young boy whose watch it was realized it was missing and told this teacher, my watch is missing. Somebody may have taken it. And the teacher said, okay, the whole class, boys and girls, please tell me if anybody here stole a watch. And there was absolute silence. Then he said, okay, I'll line you up. Of course, this older man is the school teacher. I'll line you all up against the wall. And I will ask you to empty your pockets. In fact, I will put my own hand in your pocket and see. Now, this young boy was thinking, oh my goodness, if he discovers this, see, I can't put it back now. How humiliating it will be for me. So I just have to suffer the humiliation. I'm very sad about that. If I had a second chance, I would not have done it. And I would have given the watch back, but now it's too late. And you said, says the younger man to the older man, you told us, okay, please close your eyes while I search your pockets. The boys lined up, they closed their eyes, and he searched their pockets. And of course, he discovered the watch. And he thought how beautiful it was that you never humiliated me. Because, you see, sir, you never ever brought the subject up again. You never ever admonished me. You never humiliated me. Nothing like that. The subject for you was closed. And that is what inspired me to be a teacher. Surely you remember this incident. Surely you remember how you saved me that day. And the retired school teacher says, no, I don't recognize you at all. He says, but how is that possible? He said, the old school teacher, you see, I also closed my eyes. And that was such a great lesson. What a high degree of compassion. So strength comes with compassion, actually, and also wisdom. See the wisdom of the old school teacher. And not knowing that he himself had closed his eyes, or the school teacher had closed his eyes, still that act of compassion inspired him, and that act of wisdom inspired him to be a school teacher. So we are tempted, of course, to criticize others, to highlight other people's faults. But this is not strength, this is weakness. As soon as we try to find fault with others, as soon as we project our own defects onto somebody else, thinking that we are higher or better than somebody else, this is not strength, this is actually weakness. And so the Lord knows that confusion, like Arjun's and all of us, is not removed without a clear perception of the immutable and glorious nature of the self. And that is where the Vedanta philosophy replaces the ideas of starting off with from a point of view of weakness. And that has gone through all the way through to our medical practice and our psychological practice, that the idea is we have to start off with a defect. No, we don't start off with a defect. Don't forget, the Abrahamic story of Adam and Eve starts off with glory, starts off with joy, starts off with a paradise, a garden of plenty. But the danger is the tree of knowledge. You may think it's good to have knowledge, but in this case, knowledge equals ignorance. It means knowledge of the secular world. It means an assessment, an approach to the world that says that I'm an individual in a struggle and battle against things which are different from me, separate from me, a kind of battle I have to take up, instead of registering it all to a proper account. But every page of the Upanishads speaks strength because it tells us our own nature is not flawed, is not defective. It is completely full, completely perfect. It is invincible, and it is infinite. Our nature is pure existence, pure consciousness, and absolute bliss. This Brahman and this Atman is one and the same thing. And ultimately, when we make approaches toward it, we become stronger and stronger. For most people, you can't take an immediate jump toward it. So be content with small steps. That is also gradually gaining strength. And so, I'm sorry to say that the idea of somebody sitting or lying on a couch and paying exorbitant fees to a counselor or somebody else to say what a fool they are, and recalling all the old records from the past, when I was 4, this happened, that happened, that is a weakening. For this reason, Swami Vivekananda goes on to say, in answer to his own question, are there no human weaknesses? There are, he says, in reply to his own question. Say the Upanishads, they say it. We are suffering from egoism. We are suffering from attraction and repulsion. We're suffering from making a wrong choice, giving a wrong direction to our energy. And so, yes, we acknowledge that. We acknowledge where we stand now. But It's not all there is. So says the Upanishads. But yes, will more weakness heal us? Will more weakness solve our weak problem? If we say we are sinners, we will be sinners. If we say we are worms, we'll be worms, he goes on to say. Would you try to wash dirt with dirt? He poses as an example. Will you add to it? Will you add guilt and shame to the idea that you are weak? You see, that's the difficulty. So stand up and say, I'm strong. I don't need to be saved. There's nothing to be saved from. And although this is not a bad starting position, theologically, it may be suitable, but we should gain in strength. We should not weaken ourselves. And Swami Vivekananda also tells us that the danger in the path of bhakti devotion is to become a howling fanatic, to encourage a weakness, a dependency, rather than strength, self-reliance, and independence. Will sin cure sin? He goes on. Weakness cure weakness. Strength, oh man, strength, says the Upanishads, he repeats. Stand up and be strong. So this is one great message about the virtue of strength. It takes strength, of course, to take charge of a chariot, because the whole example in the Kathopanishad as well is mentioned, and the Bhagavad Gita is the idea of self-control. Does it take greater strength to go with the flow in terms of lack of self-control? Which takes the greatest strength? Which is the greater test of character? Allowing the mind and the senses to go their own way. You see, if you did that in human life, in human social life, there would be a problem. If you say, let people do what they want. And there's a tendency like that in society to some extent. Because we are free. We want freedom. And freedom equates to democracy in many societies. No, you're not free. You're not free to rob a bank. You're not free to murder somebody. There are constraints. Some people believe in the freedom of speech. You go to London, you can stand in Hyde Park. You can say what you want, more or less. But then you see, you have to face the wrath of the crowd that don't like what you're saying. There will always be a constraint. Where can we get this proper freedom? Nobody is entirely free on that level. But deep within, we find absolute freedom. In discussing the idea of free will, Swami Vivekananda will tell us, this idea of will and freedom, these are opposites. These are antagonistic to each other. It doesn't make any sense. In that sense, free will is not possible because will is contingent on something preceding. And that means that we are not free. We may have a certain level of freedom of choice, but the restriction is it's only either this or that. And some pre-existing thing must be there. And Swami Vivekananda goes on to disagree with the philosopher Schopenhauer when he attributes an original cause to will. He says, although he may have studied the Eastern philosophy, on this point he would disagree. No, there is a position of freedom which is entirely free in its absolute sense. And it is that that gives us the strength we require. And of course, whenever we acquire this quality of strength, we strengthen others also. That surely is the ultimate. Not to be satisfied with our own inner perfection, but to allow it to spill over and saturate every single aspect of our experience, the whole of society. So automatically, it becomes strengthening. If you offer somebody true compassion, it becomes strengthening, not weakening. And if you lead somebody to understand their pristine internal nature, that becomes an inexhaustible source of strength. And so with these few words, with about 10 minutes to go or so, and in these talks, my preference is not to have them necessarily as talks, but to leave a little space for some questions or comments or additions even. And that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Swamiji, I can ask a question.
Yes.
So when you lose to your when you give in to your temptations, and when you are losing to your mind, so to say, many times repeatedly, how do you recover the strength from that? Because the repeated failures, repeatedly giving in to the old habits, weakens you and weakens your resolve as well. So how do you how do you strengthen yourself in that case?
You see, that's like asking the question, when my bank account goes into the red, what should I do? You make sure you put it into the black. Just by repeating words, you won't get it. You see, if you repeat a word without any emotional connection to it, then it has no effect. You see, supposing I say strong, supposing I visualize an elephant, and I repeat elephant, 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 it'll have no effect. But if I associate strength with the elephant and feel an infusion of strength from it, then I become strong. And all our weakness comes from internal conversations with ourselves. And so the way we view our world is the basis of all our inner conversations. If we think that the world is just a series of people and places and events in front of us, something we have to deal with, and don't have a rich inner spiritual life, it doesn't matter how many times we make a resolution, it's not going to work. It's based on a false premise, a false understanding of the world in front. So strength comes from faith. And faith is a curious mixture, because faith, on the one hand, has a self-surrender aspect to it, but also that has a strength in it. You see, supposing I line people up, and I've done this actually, and say, okay, please put your backs to each other in one straight line. I'll stand at the front, and you stand in front of that, and you fall back, and I will catch you, and behind me is a whole team of people who will be supporting. Then will you drop back? If you have real faith, you'll do it easily. So there's a certain strength in letting go also. Let go and let God is a kind of a dictum that many people know. So the strength of self-surrender, that's one kind of strength. But the other is on the other side of it, the strength to catch the other. And both are necessary. So we have to counter all our bad habits, as it were. All the habits that will cause us pain with counter habits. And we have to have this element of faith, that all the resources for our counter habits are all there around us and in front of us and with us. They come in the form of scriptural dictums. They come in the form of talks like this, which is essentially scripture, same thing. They come in the form of a teacher. They come in the form of your own self-effort, your capacity to change your mind or to insert positive thoughts as you want repeatedly with great love. Most people will have to resort to love of God. But that will have to be such a process that it doesn't descend into irrationality. And so that faith in God, love of God, love of a personal ideal that intensifies, automatically gives the trust. And when we view the world in front as a gift, as a provision, as a manifestation of that one, this will then be arranging the principles of oneness in actuality. We have to see it. And more importantly, we have to feel it. Probably we have to get out of the head for many people and into the heart. And those who are overly in the heart will have to balance it with the head, and both will have to balance it with the hand. That is, asserting the will, asserting the intellect, and asserting the emotions. Because these are the dominant three dimensions of the mind, they come out as yogas. And in amongst that will be the fourth, the capacity for equilibrium of mind through meditation. These four yogas have to be practiced and integrated. They have to be done systematically. They have to be done with the strength of faith and the knowledge that I am one without a second. Water cannot wet me, fire cannot burn me, wind cannot affect me in any way, dry me. I am that immortal thing. This is the formula that Krishna uses. And also this great disturbance of mind, if we're sticking with the Bhagavad Gita, we'd find in the 6th chapter. Bringing the mind back again and again, controlling the mind in situ, that is dedicating all actions to God, if you're a devotee, if that's the way that is the approach you make. What about other approaches? A similar thing, dedicated to truth. So there must be a strong desire for this. These four qualifications for students apply to all students. A strong desire for freedom, if you're a jnani. A strong desire for establishing what is the truth, that is, what never changes. The application of a discerning mind that understands these. But there's no holiday for it. We have to continuously do it. We have to play the game of guiding thought, always. And do it in a sporting, loving way, with great faith. And a sense of fun and humor, by the way, also, because otherwise it becomes riddled with guilt. We go back to, I am weak. No, I am strong. Swami Vivekananda, what was his meditation? Is on the heart of a lion. The very embodiment of strength is there. So we don't say sin, we say weakness. All sin is weakness, and all weakness is ignorance. Antidote is knowledge.
Swami, can I ask one thing in relation to a discussion we were having about asanas? And I was thinking about the warrior postures, and do they connect to this idea of not overcoming the mind, but the sense of one's internal strength is coming through when you're in those postures?
Yes, you see, asanas have a limited value if you don't take them from the way in which they were attended originally. See, Patanjali first brings this thing up, asana, really meaning the capacity to sit for prolonged periods of time in an easy, natural posture that is conducive to concentration. So all the classical texts on Hatha Yoga will all really be emphasizing postures for concentration, for meditation, Siddhasana, Padmasana, etc. Virasana, hero posture. But the rest are necessary. So later we find an intricate development of the spiritual culture, of the physical culture of this. But don't forget, all yoga, if it's proper yoga, all yoga is designed for unity and harmony, a union between body, mind, spirit, a unity of all dimensions, Eastern, Western, everything. So if we are really to get true value from these postures, these asanas, we should feel that the body is not something that is weak and has to be corrected and strengthened. We should think that it is already infused with divine light and glory. That's a better approach, isn't it? That everything within the body, the complex structure of a cell, an organic cell, is actually infused with true existence, with infinity, and with pure consciousness. Since it's only manifested from one thing, it must have all these characteristics that settle down and condense as a human body. So, asanas, like every other activity, should be something like a worship. When you do it in this way, not only do you get physical strength, but you will get mental and spiritual strength as well. Overall strength will be there. So every part of these asanas can become a meditation and should be.
Thank you, Swami.
In many of these postures, some mantras are given, and that is also useful to understand the spiritual dimension. That as you do these postures, you can repeat some mantras. Of course, the most obvious mantra is Gayatri mantra. But then if you have your mantra from a teacher, you can use that also. And the other mantras can be used that embody these qualities. For example, if you want the strength of the wind, if you want the strength of Vayu, that nothing can conquer, it is the all-conquering thing, really. If you want that, then you can repeat the bija mantra for that. See, it's called yam, and so on. You take the tantric bija mantras and assert that. Same thing during the postures, where possible, you can adopt mudras that symbolize this as well. All you're doing is you're going back to the divine glories manifested in the 5 primordial subtle elements, which are nothing more than God's glory. All right, so now we're past 11:30. So thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. May you all be perfect heroes and heroines.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Bonne journée.
Merci.
Thank you, Swamiji.